Biological warfare, or the use of disease as a weapon, has deep historical roots, stretching back to ancient civilizations. Early human conflicts often involved the manipulation of nature's deadliest forces, diseases, toxins, and poisons, intended to devastate enemies while conserving resources. Unlike modern warfare, these early forms of biological attacks were often rudimentary, but their effects were nonetheless brutal and far-reaching. In some of the earliest recorded cases, armies would poison wells, introduce diseased bodies into water supplies, or release disease-ridden animals to infect enemy forces. These methods were used as part of siege tactics, aiming to weaken an enemy from within, often without engaging directly in battle. Ancient Greeks and Romans were known to throw dead animals into wells to contaminate the water. Similarly, Scythian archers dipped their arrows in decomposing bodies and excrement to increase the likelihood of infections in their enemies. One of the most infamous cases in ancient biological warfare occurred during the siege of Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia, Ukraine, in 1346, where the Mongol army, suffering from the plague, catapulted the corpses of plague victims over the city walls. The resulting outbreak of the Black Death not only decimated the city but is believed to have contributed to the spread of the plague across Europe, ultimately killing tens of millions. These early forms of biological warfare were unrefined and primarily aimed at exploiting natural outbreaks of disease, but they laid the foundation for the more calculated and deliberate use of disease as a weapon in later centuries. As humanity entered the Middle Ages, biological warfare tactics became increasingly sophisticated. In this era, siege warfare continued to dominate, and commanders sought ways to minimize direct confrontation while maximizing the suffering of their enemies. In addition to using poisoned wells and disease-laden bodies, medieval armies also employed chemical weapons, such as Greek fire, which burned intensely and could not be extinguished by water. One chilling example of biological warfare in the medieval period was the deliberate spreading of plague-infected corpses and contaminated goods. During the 14th century conflicts, including the aforementioned siege of Kaffa, it became common practice to launch plague victims over city walls using catapults, thereby infecting entire populations. Disease would spread uncontrollably within the enclosed walls of besieged cities, and fear, paranoia, and chaos would quickly follow. The Renaissance and early modern period saw significant advances in science, including the study of microbiology, which eventually paved the way for more deliberate uses of biological agents in warfare. During the French and Indian Wars of the 18th century, British forces, aware of the devastating effects of smallpox, deliberately gave blankets infected with smallpox to Native American tribes. This early form of biological warfare, though primitive, demonstrated a calculated effort to use disease as a weapon to wipe out enemy populations. By the 19th and 20th centuries, scientific advancements led to the isolation and understanding of bacteria and viruses, making biological warfare even more precise and dangerous. Researchers and military strategists alike began to experiment with various pathogens that could be deployed in conflicts, leading to the modern era of biological weapons. The horrors of World War I and the development of chemical weapons during the conflict opened a new chapter in biological warfare. As nations raced to develop chemical weapons like mustard gas, they also began to explore the potential of biological agents. Early efforts to weaponize diseases like anthrax, cholera, and glanders, an infectious disease that affects horses and can be transmitted to humans, were undertaken by several nations. Germany was known to have experimented with glanders, infecting livestock that was sent to enemy forces, and Japan's Unit 731 would later use biological warfare extensively during World War II. The devastating potential of biological agents became clearer during this period. Biological weapons could be deployed silently, with little immediate evidence of their release, but could cause widespread death and panic within days or weeks. Diseases like anthrax, which could survive for years in the soil as spores, became a prime focus of military research, as their durability and lethality made them ideal candidates for biological warfare. World War II marked the institutionalization of biological warfare programs, with both Axis and Allied powers pursuing secret research into weaponized pathogens. The Japanese military's Unit 731 conducted some of the most notorious biological warfare experiments, testing anthrax, plague, cholera, and other diseases on Chinese prisoners of war and civilian populations. Thousands of people were killed in these brutal experiments, and the full extent of Unit 731's atrocities only came to light after the war. The United States and Britain also developed their own biological warfare programs during the war. However, the use of these weapons in combat was limited, in part due to fears that their effects could not be controlled and that retaliation could lead to global pandemics. Despite this, research continued in secret, with both the US and the Soviet Union investing heavily in biological weapons during the Cold War. As the world emerged from the horrors of World War II and the use of chemical weapons, international efforts to curb the use of biological and chemical agents in warfare gained momentum. In 1925, the Geneva Protocol was signed, prohibiting the use of biological and chemical weapons in war. However, the protocol did not address the production, research, or stockpiling of such weapons, allowing nations to continue developing biological weapons under the guise of research and defense. It wasn't until the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, that a comprehensive international treaty was established to prohibit the development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons. Although the BWC marked a significant step forward, enforcement of the treaty has remained a challenge. Verification mechanisms were weak, and accusations of secret biological weapons programs, particularly during the Cold War, continued to surface. The history of biological warfare reveals humanity's long-standing fascination with weaponizing disease, exploiting the invisible power of pathogens to strike at enemies. From ancient times to the modern era, the use of biological agents has evolved from crude tactics to sophisticated and secretive weapons programs. Though international efforts have sought to ban biological warfare, the threat remains ever present, especially in a world where technological advances, genetic engineering, and synthetic biology could lead to the creation of new and more deadly pathogens. The origins of biological warfare serve as a stark reminder of the devastating potential that lies within nature's microscopic killers, a potential that has been harnessed time and again, with catastrophic consequences. As we move forward, vigilance and international cooperation will be critical in preventing the resurgence of biological warfare in an increasingly interconnected world. Biological weapons are unique in their method of attack, using living organisms or toxins derived from organisms to cause disease and death. Unlike conventional or chemical weapons, which kill instantly or cause immediate injury, biological weapons operate silently and invisibly, often taking days or even weeks to manifest their effects. This chapter delves into the scientific foundations of biological weapons, focusing on the pathogens and toxins used, their delivery systems, and the challenges of controlling their spread. Biological weapons rely on microorganisms to cause infections in humans, animals, or plants. Pathogens such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi are the most common agents used, as they can be highly contagious and have devastating effects. Each category of pathogen has unique characteristics that make them suitable for different types of biological warfare. Bacteria. Bacterial pathogens are among the most commonly used in biological warfare due to their ability to cause severe diseases. For example, Bacillus anthracis, the bacterium that causes anthrax, is a well-known biological weapon. Anthrax spores can survive in harsh conditions for years, making them easy to store and deploy. Inhalation anthrax has a high fatality rate, and once it takes hold, it can spread rapidly through a population. Other bacterial agents include Yersinia pestis, which causes plague, and Francisella tularensis, which causes tularemia. The infectious nature of bacteria makes them ideal for incapacitating or killing large populations. Viruses. Viral agents are another potent category of biological weapons. Unlike bacteria, viruses need a host to replicate, which makes them harder to control. However, some viruses can spread quickly and cause widespread panic. For instance, variola virus, which causes smallpox, has been weaponized in the past due to its high mortality rate and contagiousness. Ebola virus, although not traditionally weaponized, is feared for its hemorrhagic fever, high fatality rate, and ability to spread through bodily fluids. Other potential viral agents include Marburg virus, hantavirus, and engineered forms of influenza. Fungi. Though less commonly weaponized than bacteria or viruses, fungi can cause devastating effects, especially when targeting crops and livestock. Fungal spores, such as those of Coccidioides immitis, can cause serious respiratory infections in humans, while other fungi can destroy entire food supplies. An attack on a nation's agricultural sector using fungal pathogens could lead to mass starvation and economic collapse. In addition to using living organisms, biological weapons can also involve toxins, which are poisonous substances produced by organisms. Unlike bacteria or viruses, toxins do not reproduce or spread from person to person. However, they can cause immediate and lethal effects upon exposure. Ricin, derived from the castor bean plant, ricin is one of the most potent natural toxins. Even a tiny amount can cause death if inhaled, ingested, or injected. Ricin attacks cells by inhibiting protein synthesis, leading to organ failure and death. It has been used in several assassination attempts, including the infamous 1978 killing of Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov. Botulinum toxin, produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum, botulinum toxin is the most lethal biological substance known to science. It causes botulism, a paralytic illness that can lead to respiratory failure. Even in minute quantities, botulinum toxin can be fatal, making it a prime candidate for biological warfare. Mycotoxins, produced by certain types of fungi, mycotoxins can contaminate food supplies and cause severe health problems. Aflatoxins, for example, are produced by molds and can cause liver cancer, immunosuppression, and death. Mycotoxins are especially dangerous because they can be introduced into crops or livestock feed, leading to long-term damage to food production. One of the key challenges in deploying biological weapons is effectively delivering the agent to the target population. Unlike conventional weapons, which rely on explosions or direct impact, biological weapons must be dispersed in a way that ensures maximum exposure while remaining undetected. Various delivery systems have been developed to achieve this, including aerosols. One of the most effective methods of delivering biological agents is through aerosolization. Aerosols are fine particles suspended in the air, which can be inhaled by the target population. Biological agents can be dispersed via aerosol generators, aircraft, or even drones. Once released, these particles can travel through the air and infect anyone who inhales them. Aerosolized biological weapons are particularly dangerous because they are invisible and odorless, making detection difficult. Contaminated food and water. Another method of delivery is through contamination of food or water supplies. Biological agents can be introduced into reservoirs, agricultural fields, or food processing plants. For instance, during the Cold War, it was feared that a biological attack could involve the contamination of grain supplies or the introduction of pathogens into municipal water systems. Contaminating essential resources can cause widespread infection and panic while disrupting the economy and infrastructure. Infected vectors. In some cases, biological weapons can be spread through vectors such as insects or animals. Fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium, were used by the Japanese in their biological warfare program during World War II. Similarly, mosquitoes could be used to spread diseases like malaria or dengue fever. The advantage of using vectors is that they can spread the disease rapidly through a population and are difficult to detect. Weaponized delivery systems. Biological agents can also be delivered using more traditional military equipment, such as bombs, missiles, or artillery shells. These systems are designed to disperse biological agents over a wide area, affecting large populations. However, these methods have the downside of potentially destroying the biological agent upon explosion, so careful design is required to ensure the agent remains viable. One of the greatest dangers of biological weapons is the difficulty in controlling their spread once released. Unlike chemical weapons, which dissipate relatively quickly, biological agents can continue to infect and spread for long periods, especially if the pathogen is contagious. For instance, an aerosolized release of smallpox could lead to a global pandemic if not contained immediately. Additionally, biological agents are influenced by environmental factors such as temperature, humidity, and wind patterns, making their deployment unpredictable. An unintended shift in wind direction could carry the agent back toward the attacking force or into civilian populations. The incubation period of many biological agents adds another layer of complexity. Victims of a biological attack may not show symptoms for days or even weeks, allowing the disease to spread undetected. This delay complicates detection and response efforts, as authorities may not realize an attack has occurred until it is too late. The history of biological weapons is as old as warfare itself. While modern biotechnology has brought biological weapons into the spotlight, civilizations have been using infectious agents and toxins in conflicts for thousands of years. This chapter explores the history of biological warfare, from its early forms in ancient times to its development during modern conflicts, and the role it has played in shaping military strategy. The use of biological agents in warfare dates back to ancient times, when rudimentary methods were employed to infect enemies. Though less sophisticated than modern techniques, these early forms of biological warfare were effective in causing widespread fear and illness. Scythian archers, 400 BCE, one of the earliest recorded uses of biological weapons comes from the Scythians, a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppes. They would dip their arrows into decomposed bodies or animal dung, ensuring that any wound inflicted would become infected. This form of biological warfare was simple yet effective, as the resulting infections would often lead to death. Hittites, 1500 BCE, the Hittites were known to drive infected animals into enemy lands to spread diseases such as tularemia. This early form of biological warfare targeted livestock and agriculture, indirectly affecting human populations by disrupting their food supply and causing outbreaks of disease. The Siege of Kaffa, 1346, one of the most infamous early examples of biological warfare, occurred during the Mongol siege of the Crimean city of Kaffa, now Feodosia, Ukraine. The Mongols, who were besieging the city, catapulted the bodies of plague victims over the city walls, attempting to spread the disease among the defenders. This act is considered one of the potential sparks that helped spread the Black Death throughout Europe, as fleeing survivors from Kaffa carried the disease with them. Contaminating water sources. Throughout history, armies have contaminated water supplies with dead animals or diseased bodies to sicken enemy forces. For example, during the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, Spartans allegedly poisoned the wells of the Athenian city of Delium with the root of the plant hellebore, which caused severe diarrhea and incapacitated many Athenians. With the advancement of scientific knowledge, the use of biological weapons became more deliberate and strategic in the early modern period. Colonial powers, in particular, employed biological warfare to subdue indigenous populations and rival empires. Smallpox is a weapon in the Americas. During the colonization of the Americas, European settlers, notably the British, are believed to have used smallpox as a biological weapon against Native American populations. In 1763, during Pontiac's rebellion, British officers, led by Geoffrey Amherst, are alleged to have distributed smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans, intentionally sparking an outbreak. The disease, to which Native Americans had no natural immunity, decimated entire communities. Though debated, this incident marks one of the earliest examples of biological warfare in the New World. Napoleonic Wars. During the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815, yellow fever and malaria were significant factors in military campaigns. Although not intentionally spread, European armies fighting in tropical regions, especially in the Caribbean, suffered devastating losses from these diseases. The French expedition to Saint-Domingue, Haiti, in 1802-1803, for instance, saw thousands of soldiers die from yellow fever, ultimately leading to France's defeat and the establishment of Haiti as an independent nation. The development of modern microbiology in the late 19th and early 20th centuries provided military strategists with a new understanding of infectious diseases, leading to the weaponization of pathogens. The 20th century saw biological warfare become a central feature of military planning, particularly during World War I and World War II. World War I, 1914 to 1918, although chemical weapons such as chlorine gas and mustard gas were the most notorious agents used during World War I, there were some early attempts at biological warfare. German forces were accused of attempting to infect horses and livestock with glanders and anthrax in enemy countries, particularly targeting neutral nations such as Romania, Argentina, and the United States. These operations were relatively small in scale, but they signaled the potential of biological warfare in future conflicts. World War II, 1939 to 1945, the largest-scale development and use of biological weapons occurred during World War II, particularly in the Japanese biological warfare program. Unit 731, a secret military unit led by General Shiro Ishii, conducted horrific experiments on human subjects in China. The Japanese used plague-infected fleas, cholera, and anthrax as biological weapons, releasing them on Chinese cities and villages. Thousands of civilians died from these diseases, which were spread intentionally as part of Japan's biological warfare efforts. Meanwhile, in the West, the Allies and Axis powers both pursued biological weapons research, though no large-scale use occurred. The United States and Britain, for example, experimented with anthrax as a potential weapon, testing it on Grignard Island off the coast of Scotland. The island remained contaminated with anthrax spores for decades after the war. The end of World War II did not bring an end to the threat of biological warfare. Instead, it marked the beginning of an intense arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, both of which feared biological attacks from the other. U.S. biological weapons program. During the Cold War, the U.S. developed a large and secretive biological weapons program. The military conducted experiments on various pathogens, including anthrax, tularemia, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis. In the 1960s, the U.S. Army carried out tests in American cities using non-lethal biological agents to study how diseases might spread. One notable test involved releasing Serratia marcescens over San Francisco, which led to a spike in pneumonia cases and one death. These tests, part of Project SHAD, Shipboard Hazard and Defense, were not widely known to the public until decades later. Soviet biological weapons program. The Soviet Union also developed an extensive biological weapons program, producing vast quantities of anthrax, smallpox, and plague bacteria. The Soviet program was notable for its size and secrecy. Even after signing the Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, in 1972, which banned the development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons, the Soviet Union continued its program in secret under the guise of civilian research. In 1979, an accidental release of anthrax spores from a Soviet military facility in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, caused an outbreak that killed at least 66 people. The Soviet government covered up the incident for years, blaming contaminated meat. In the 21st century, the threat of biological weapons has shifted from state actors to non-state actors and terrorist organizations. The attacks of September 11, 2001, followed by the 2001 anthrax attacks in the United States, marked a new era of biological warfare. The anthrax letters, sent to media outlets and U.S. senators, resulted in 22 cases of anthrax infection and 5 deaths. Though the perpetrator, U.S. government scientist Bruce Ivans, was later identified, the event exposed the vulnerability of modern societies to bioterrorism. Biological weapons remain a significant concern today, with advances in biotechnology and genetic engineering increasing the potential for new, more deadly pathogens to be weaponized. The ease of access to scientific knowledge, coupled with the global spread of technology, has raised fears that terrorists or rogue states could develop and deploy biological weapons with catastrophic results. As biological science advanced rapidly in the 20th and 21st centuries, the world faced both opportunities and threats regarding the use of microorganisms in warfare. In the modern era, the ethical considerations, legal frameworks, and international tensions surrounding biological weapons have become more pronounced, demanding global cooperation and constant vigilance. The use of biological weapons presents profound ethical dilemmas, as these weapons specifically target living organisms in ways that are indiscriminate, uncontrollable, and devastating. Unlike conventional weapons, biological agents can spread beyond intended targets, affecting civilian populations, ecosystems, and even future generations. Indiscriminate nature of biological agents. One of the key ethical issues is that biological weapons, once released, do not distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. Diseases such as smallpox, plague, or anthrax can spread uncontrollably, impacting vulnerable populations such as children, the elderly, and those with weakened immune systems. These outbreaks can also devastate the healthcare infrastructure of a region, causing further deaths from other untreated diseases. Long-term consequences. Biological warfare can have far-reaching, long-lasting consequences. Pathogens like anthrax spores can survive in the environment for decades, remaining a threat long after a conflict has ended. This raises ethical concerns about the future impact on affected populations and the potential for bioweapons to harm ecosystems by spreading zoonotic diseases or causing ecological imbalances. Inhumane nature of suffering. Another ethical dilemma involves the inhumane nature of death caused by biological weapons. Many diseases used in biological warfare lead to prolonged suffering, agonizing symptoms, and a slow death. Victims of hemorrhagic fevers, for example, experience intense bleeding, organ failure, and excruciating pain. This contrasts with the more immediate effects of conventional weapons, making biological warfare particularly brutal and morally unacceptable. Potential for misuse in research. Advances in biotechnology have increased concerns about the misuse of biological research. While research into pathogens, genetics, and biotechnology can lead to medical breakthroughs and disease eradication, the same research can be used to create deadlier biological weapons. This dual-use dilemma presents significant ethical challenges, especially regarding the regulation of cutting-edge science. In response to the growing threat of biological warfare, the international community has developed several legal frameworks aimed at preventing the development, stockpiling, and use of biological weapons. Despite these efforts, challenges remain in enforcement, transparency, and the global response to potential violations. The Geneva Protocol of 1925, one of the earliest international efforts to address the use of biological weapons, was the Geneva Protocol, which prohibited the use of chemical and biological weapons in war. While this was a significant step forward, the protocol did not prohibit the research, development, or stockpiling of biological weapons. Additionally, several signatories added reservations allowing for retaliatory use of such weapons, weakening the treaty's overall impact. The Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, of 1972, the most significant legal instrument for controlling biological weapons, is the Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, which entered into force in 1975. The BWC was the first multilateral disarmament treaty that completely banned the development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons. It required signatory nations to destroy existing stockpiles and prohibited the transfer of biological weapons to other countries. However, the BWC has limitations, particularly in terms of verification and enforcement. Unlike other arms control treaties, such as the Chemical Weapons Convention, CWC, the BWC lacks a formal mechanism for verifying compliance. There are no mandatory inspections or verification processes, relying instead on the goodwill of states. This has led to accusations that certain nations, particularly during the Cold War, secretly continued to develop biological weapons. Challenges to international cooperation. Despite the existence of the BWC, international tensions and distrust between nations have complicated efforts to fully eliminate biological weapons. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union violated the spirit of the BWC by maintaining covert biological weapons programs. This was exposed by the Sverdlovsk anthrax leak in 1979, where the Soviet Union's secret biological weapons program came to light. Additionally, the rapid advances in biotechnology have made it easier for non-state actors, including terrorist organizations, to potentially develop biological weapons. This raises new challenges for the international community, as existing treaties were primarily designed to control state actors, not rogue groups or individuals. Biodefense versus bioweapons. One of the major controversies surrounding biological weapons in the modern era is the thin line between biodefense and the development of offensive biological weapons. Many nations, including the United States, have established biodefense programs aimed at researching pathogens to develop vaccines and countermeasures in the event of a bioterrorism attack. However, critics argue that such research can easily be diverted into offensive biological warfare programs. This creates an atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion among nations, particularly when transparency is lacking. Genetic engineering and synthetic biology. Advances in CRISPR and synthetic biology have raised new concerns about the potential for biological weapons to be designed with enhanced lethality, specificity, or resistance to treatments. In theory, these technologies could be used to create pathogens that target specific ethnic groups, ethnic bioweapons, or that are resistant to existing vaccines or antibiotics. While these developments hold promise for medicine, they also open the door to new forms of biological warfare that are harder to detect and defend against. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the nature of warfare is evolving, and biological weapons remain a persistent and growing threat. This chapter explores the future dangers posed by advances in biotechnology, the threat of bioterrorism, and the need for global preparedness in the face of a potential biological warfare event. One of the most significant biological threats today comes from non-state actors and terrorist organizations. The relatively low cost of creating biological weapons, combined with the availability of scientific knowledge, makes bioterrorism an increasingly plausible risk. Non-state actors and terrorist groups, unlike nuclear weapons, which require vast resources and technical expertise, biological weapons can be created in rudimentary labs with relatively little investment. Terrorist organizations, extremist groups, and lone actors could use easily accessible pathogens, such as anthrax, botulinum toxin, or even weaponized smallpox, to carry out attacks on civilian populations. The 2001 anthrax attacks in the United States demonstrated the impact a small-scale biological attack could have, causing widespread panic, economic disruption, and casualties. Weaponizing emerging infectious diseases. The emergence of new infectious diseases, such as SARS, MERS, and COVID-19, has raised concerns about the potential weaponization of these pathogens. While these viruses have natural origins, their rapid spread and global impact have highlighted the vulnerability of the world to pandemics. In the hands of terrorists or rogue states, such pathogens could be engineered or released to cause mass casualties or destabilize governments.